Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Blood painted the winter grass like a secret someone was too ashamed to keep. Izira lay half-buried at the lip of Brackenmore Ridge, breath thin as torn paper, cloak shredded, one hand clenched around a wolf cub whose fur smelled of iron and snow. Pain made the world small and sharp. Each heartbeat felt like someone striking a bell too close to her ear. She had used the last of her strength to free the cub from a steel trap that shattered her palms and promised her ribs would follow. Her mouth tasted of rust. Above her, the sky was pewter and the pines kept their silence, as if they had sworn to forget. A foot in the trees, something watched with a patience older than hunger. Her fingers slid along the cub's ribs. It trembled, but trusted her as if trust were the only currency left between living things. She tried to call for help, to push words into the air, but the sound escaped as a thin animal cry. Footsteps arrived then, heavy and exact, breaking the snow like a measured drum, and a shadow fell over her like a hand. She held the cub and waited. When the hood slid back, Izira saw a face both harsh and terribly familiar in the way it carried weather. Strong cheekbones, eyes the color of river stone, and a mouth that did not waste itself on small kindness. The man moved with a calm that made trees hold their breath. He crouched without hesitation, and his fingers, large, calloused, careful, lifted the cub as if it were the most fragile thing in his world. Izira wanted to snatch it back. Her limbs would not obey. He smelled of smoke and wolf and winter. His coat was dark, edges rimmed with fur, and at the cuff a small sigil gleamed, a crown woven of antlers. He looked at Izira as if reading a map written in the wrong language, and decided to learn it. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, voice low and rough like stones grinding, but the words were not chastisement. They were a register of danger and claim. She felt seen and absurdly small under that gaze, like someone caught doing something holy and forbidden. He lifted her with one arm, the motion shocking in its gentleness for such a broad man, and she felt both shame and relief. Her mind clung to one stubborn memory: the trap's teeth, the cub's tiny howl, the dark scratch mark left on a fence post, a circle split by a slash, a cruel signature. The mayor had shrugged when she showed him the mark, saying trappers brought coin, and wolves were pests. Hardin, the mayor's son, had laughed as if the world were a joke that favored him. The village looked away. Izira had smuggled the cub into her cottage, wrapped it in shawls, and whispered songs her mother used to hum. She had sworn to return the cub to its den, to do the only honest thing left to her, and in doing so she had stepped onto a path of small rebellions that had no room for polite compromises. She had not expected the trapper to follow so close, nor had she imagined that someone of the forest would answer her rescue with more than curiosity. As the man carried them through trees that touched like old friends, Izira's thoughts were a thrum of guilt and stubborn pride. She kept expecting a laugh, a shove, or the mayor's thin fury. Instead, the man paused and set the cub down beside a stone hollow and tended it with a tenderness that made her chest ache and wonder. His name, when she finally found the breath to ask, fell into her lap like a river pebble: Kalen. It was a name that carried the hush of deep places. He spoke little, but his gestures told history. He cleaned the cub's wound with water that tasted of iron and herbs he crushed with the heel of his hand. Izira watched him with a fierce mix of arrogance and gratitude, angry that anyone could claim authority over the small life she had saved, grateful because she could not have carried them both far. Every move he made hinted at a life lived along borders. The curve of his shoulder was familiar to wolves, the set of his jaw to men. He did not ask her name at once. When he did, there was a softness she hadn't expected, like sunlight finding a crack in a wall. She told him, voice thin, and he nodded as if the name fit into some larger map he was folding. His eyes darkened at the mention of the trapper's mark. For a heartbeat, she saw something like rage, and then control closed over it like winter armor. She felt a shift, as if night rearranged its stars. They moved until a hollow of moss welcomed them, and the cub, warm against Kalen's chest, slept with a small sound like a borrowed bell. Izira's vision blurred at the edges. Kalen set her down like someone easing a bird and wrapped her wounds with cloth that smelled of pine and spice. His fingers were rough, his touch precise. She wanted to ask questions. Who he was, why a man of such bearing walked these ridges, but words were awkward shapes. He said only one thing that lodged under her ribs. You have made a debt. It was not accusation, so much as law spoken quietly. The wayward remembers which joints are true. Izira felt the weight of that debt like a stone placed on her sternum and knew, somewhere beneath pain and pride, that her life had changed in a way she could not unwrite. A scent from the ridge drifted down then, smoke mixed with the metallic tang of fresh iron, and Kalen's had snapped up. He moved with a quick violence that made the trees flinch, and Izira understood without words that danger had found them and chosen an ill time. As he gathered the cub and climbed, he tucked the small creature into the crook of his arm and looked at Izira with an expression that could be mercy or judgment. She met his gaze and found in it the promise of storm and shelter both, and then the world contracted to the sound of footsteps coming fast through the snow. Dawn came brittle and silver, sliding over Brackenmore like a slow blade. Izira woke to cold on her cheek and the cub's steady breathing pressed to her sternum. The sound was a hymn she had not known she needed. The hollow smelled of pine, wet earth, and the faint oil of crushed herbs. Kalen moved nearby, with a quiet the woods seemed to accept. He unwrapped bandages with hands that had been taught gentleness by necessity, not sentiment, and tended the cub's paw with water that tasted faintly of iron and bitter green leaves. Izira tried to memorize the way he worked, how his fingers steadied as he bound the cloth, how his thumbs found a rhythm that was almost a song. He wrapped the last fold tight and then, without looking up, said only, "You have made a debt." The phrase landed in her chest like a stone into deep water. She felt the old ledger of her life, small kindnesses balanced against a world that measured worth in coin and lineage. Tilt. Her palms tingled where the trap had bitten into her skin. She could still feel the metals cold. Around them the ridge kept watch in the language of birds. Even the wind dropped its voice. Izira wanted to ask questions. Who he was, why a man moved like a shadow of wolves, whether debts could be repaid with kindness. But pain made words heavy, and the debt hung between them as if already written in bone. The cub shifted, and in its small breath she heard the unfinished sentence of what she had done. Before the trap, Izira's life had been a pattern of careful stitches. Her cottage stood at the edge of Fenmar Row, where reeds met furrows and villagers kept their days strictly counted. She fixed nets at dawn, tended ailing hens with willow tea, and hummed a slow tune at night by a single gray candle. People called her stubborn in a way that felt like a complaint and a compliment, as if she were a thing that refused to be smoothed. The mayor treated the wolves like an accounting problem. His son, Garan, wore his contempt like a badge and measured people by how much their presence bothered him. When she first found the trapper's mark, a circle split by a slash carved on a fence post and the smell of smoke lingering under it, the mayor had shrugged. "Trappers bring coin," he said, folding his hands like a man arranging excuses. Garin had laughed as if cruelty were cleverness. Izira had no coin and no pedigree to ask for mercy. She had only the stubbornness that naming a wrong required correction. She had hidden the cub in shawls and carried it to her hearth, whispering old lullabies that tasted faintly of sea salt memories. She had planned to take the cub home to its den and call it done, never imagining that the act would echo out of the woods and strike the rails of authority like a bell. Kalen's presence felt like a break in the weather that had always framed her life. He did not offer explanations. His name came like a river stone dropped into conversation, simple, heavy, absolute. The crown of antlers embroidered on his cuff was not ornament. It was a sigil with roots. The pack answered to that sigil with a silence that was less obedience and more recognition. Izira had grown up knowing the stories of a king in the wild, of rules older than fields and men. tales told around the villagers' fires in warnings and wonder. She had believed those stories were for children and smug hunters, until she stood in the hollow and watched Kalen move among the shadows and heard a ripple of distant howls bend to him like tides to moon. Watching him, she realized that debts in this place were not trivial things but laws written into the way bones met and blood remembered. To him, saving the cub was a disturbance in order, a beautiful thing, perhaps, but a disturbance nonetheless. He did not look at her with the condescension of a man who had all answers. He measured, like a judge who prefers proof to speech. Izira felt an odd tilt inside her, equal parts fear and something like awe. There was an intimacy in the way he handled the cub, a gentleness that did not belong to a man who wore power like armor. It made her heart do a small, reckless thing she could not name. The scent on the wind changed, smoke threaded with iron, the harsh edge of tools, and someone who left tracks that had nothing honest in them. Kalen's head snapped up, the muscles at his jaw flexed. The forest replied with a low, cautious chorus, branches clicking like dry bones, then stillness. It took only a moment for the danger to sharpen into a plan. Kalen moved with a speed that belonged to predators and defenders both. He gathered the cub and Izira with an economy of motion, carrying them in a way that made her feel both protected and exposed. From the hollow's lip, other shapes flickered. Not men but wolf bodies in the dim, eyes reflecting like small moons. They watched without advancing, a border of fur and bone. Izira's voice caught when she tried to speak. The shame she had learned under Garen's mocking and the mayor's dismissal rose like a tide. She had saved a life because it was the right act, and now those right acts had consequences that reached into territories she had never thought to cross. Kalen's hand on her shoulder was firm, not soft. It steadied rather than smoothed. He did not promise safety in words. Instead he said, quietly, "We move." The agreement felt like the click of a lock. They went deeper, where the trees watched with denser eyes, and the path remembered older feet. Izira stumbled, pain flaring in her side, and Kalen almost gently caught her elbow. He did not ask for explanation or look for heroics. He accepted her action like a fact to be accounted. Around them the pack's scents layered, pine, musk, the sweet ghost of old kills, and Izira understood that she walked now inside a network that judged by loyalty and consequence rather than contract and coin. Questions she had kept locked under a dresser came loose. What would it mean to belong somewhere that kept balance in bone? What did it require of her? Kalen spoke of debts in terms that were not threats but law, reparations made through acts, protection given and owed, rights that rebalanced what the world had tipped. He said nothing of love or gentleness beyond what his hands demonstrated. He showed respect to the cub, and that showed a kind of mercy. Far off, a torched light moved along the ridge. Human, deliberate. The trapper was not careless. He tracked, and he wanted payment for his iron. Izira looked at Kalen and found resolve hardening in her chest. If she had made a debt, she would pay it not with money but with what she had: stubbornness, hands that could heal, and a courage that had not yet learned to be quiet. The torch came closer, and the hollow held its breath. The torchlight shivered through the trees like a tongue of accusation. Izira pressed against the frozen ground, heartbeat thrumming against her ribs, the cub a trembling warmth at her hip. Kalen stood between her and the oncoming glow, his body tense, his head slightly bowed as though listening to something far older than sound. The pack had melted into the shadows, invisible but present. The forest seemed to lean toward him, awaiting a command. When the first crack of footsteps split the silence, Izira's breath caught. She recognized the gate even before the man's face broke into view. Roven, the trapper, broad-shouldered and cruel-mouthed, eyes shining with the delight of those who thought pain proved power. A long scar cleaved his cheek, the mark of an animal that hadn't died quickly enough. His hand rested lazily on the haft of his iron spear, and when he saw Izira crouched behind Kalen, his grin widened. "There's my thief," he said, voice slick with mockery. "You cost me a fine bounty, girl. You'll pay in kind." He lifted the torch higher, its light licking the trees, and then froze. His gaze had caught the crown of antlers embroidered on Kalen's cuff. The grin faltered. "You're no common woodsman," he murmured. "You're—" His words died as the wind shifted, and something wild moved through it, carrying the scent of fur and blood and judgment. Kalen stepped forward, the snow whispering under his boots. "You set traps in forbidden ground," he said, his tone quiet but edged like tempered steel. Rovin's jaw tightened, greed and fear warred briefly in his eyes. "Wolves don't own the forest," he spat. "Men do." Kalen's lips curved, not in amusement, but in something colder. "Then men should remember what the forest owns in return." His voice rolled low, a sound that didn't quite belong to a human throat. The trees seemed to listen, and somewhere in the dark, something answered, a low, resonant growl that made the air itself tremble. Rovin stumbled back, torch wavering. "You're one of them," he hissed. "A cursed beast." Kalen did not deny it. Instead, he moved with a speed that turned the moment into a blur. One heartbeat he stood still, the next he was upon Rovin, hand locked around the trapper's wrist. The torch fell, hissing in the snow. Izira flinched as metal clattered. Kalen wrenched the spear free and tossed it aside as though it weighed nothing. "Leave," he said, voice low, lethal. "And tell those who hunt my kin that the debt is mine now." Rovin staggered away, face pale, fear wrestling greed into retreat. When he vanished into the trees, silence pressed close again. Izira exhaled shakily, realizing only then that her nails had bitten crescents into her palms. For a moment neither spoke. The forest's hush felt fragile, like glass waiting for sound to shatter it. Kalen's eyes found hers, gray and deep as storm water. "You see what they make of the wild," he said quietly. "Iron teeth and false courage." He looked toward the path where Rovin had fled. "He'll return. They always do." His gaze flicked to the cub, whose breathing had steadied. "And so will we." Izira felt a pulse of defiance rise in her throat. "You think I should hide?" she asked, anger slipping past exhaustion. "They'll hunt you for less," Kalen said. "You saved one of mine. That makes you target and kin both." The words lodged under her ribs, heavy with meaning she couldn't yet name. She wanted to argue, to claim independence, but something in his tone, neither command nor plea, stilled her. He turned, motioning for her to follow. "There's a place where they won't find you," he said. "At least not easily." She hesitated only a moment before rising, her body screaming protest. The cub whined softly, and she scooped it close, whispering comfort. Then, clutching her courage like a fragile flame, she followed the Alpha King into the deep woods. They walked until the moon dipped and the forest became a cathedral of shadows. The air grew thicker, older, frost glittered like veins of silver along the bark. Kalen moved without hesitation, as though the roots themselves guided him. Izira limped behind, each step pulling threads of pain through her side. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, voice trembling. "Home," he said simply. When they crested a low ridge, she saw it, a valley cupped between mountains, hidden by mist and guarded by towering pines. Within its heart glowed faint lights, neither torch nor fire, but something softer, alive. Wolves moved below, silver shapes among the ferns, silent and watchful. A wooden keep rose beside a black lake, its walls carved with runes that seemed to shift when she looked too long. It wasn't grand in the way of kings, but it breathed power and belonging. "This is your home?" she whispered. Kalen paused at the ridge's edge, gaze sweeping the valley. "Ours," he said, the word heavy with implication. Then softer. "If you choose it." The offer startled her. Choice had never been part of her story. Yet something in the air, the stillness, the quiet authority, made her think of safety wrapped in teeth. They reached the keep's threshold just as dawn began to silver the mist. Wolves gathered at the edges, eyes bright, heads bowed slightly to Kalen. None bared teeth at Izira, though she felt their curiosity brush against her like cold wind. Inside, the hall was warm and dim, lit by braziers that smelled of pine resin and smoke. A long table ran the center, carved from a single tree trunk, and along the far wall hung pelts not as trophies, but as memorials, each marked with a name burned into the leather. Kaelin set the cub gently on a fur beside the fire. It whimpered once, then slept. "He'll live," Kaelin said quietly. "Because of you." Izira sank to her knees, exhaustion overtaking her. Then maybe it was worth it. Her voice cracked, and something in Kaelin's expression softened. "Most things worth doing come with blood," he said. "But few bleed for strangers." His gaze lingered a heartbeat too long before turning to the door. "Rest. When night comes, you'll need your strength." Izira wanted to ask what for, but sleep was already pulling her under. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was Kaelin standing by the firelight, eyes shadowed, looking at her not like a savior or burden, but like someone who had found an echo in an unexpected place. Izira woke in a hall smelling of pine resin and warm smoke, the edge of sleep clinging like cobweb. Pain knifed her side with every breath, a sharp thread reminding her body was fragile and whole in small measures. Braziers at the far wall hissed, casting long gold stripes across carved stone. Wolves lingered at the perimeter, bodies like living shadow, ears flicking as if tuned to an old frequency. A fur lay across her shoulders. It carried the scent of earth, rain, and old fires. Kaelin stood by the fire, a silhouette softened by flames. He watched her with a careful steadiness that made the room feel anchored. She touched the bandage at her ribs and felt the coarse weave press into skin, the traps bite a map she could trace with her fingertip. Outside, the world kept its own slow rhythm, branches creaking, distant water complaining on rocks. She had been pulled into this rhythm by a single stubborn act, and now the rhythm asked something back. As sleep loosened its grip, she remembered the cub's heat, the trap's iron teeth, and a man whose hands were both judgment and shelter. The hall held its breath with her as she rose, and for the first time her life felt not merely a small ledger of kindness, but a page turned by a force older than village law. Kaelin sat opposite the fire and set a bowl of broth between them, steam curling like a trail of questions. He spoke in small, deliberate sentences, the kind that measured truth in careful units. "There are customs," he said, "and debts that answer for the harm done." He told her of pacts older than any market ledger, of exchanges that had hardened into law, where a hunter may take, where offerings must be left, and how a broken pact called for repair. He did not lecture, he described. The elders of the grove kept lists not on paper, but in memory and action. Izira listened as if learning a new tongue. Each rule slipped in and settled like gravel in the shape of a path. Kaelin explained the difference between a debt paid in coin and a debt paid in service. The latter, he said, wound into the fabric of the land itself. She learned that what she had done for one cub unraveled a small knot in a larger weave. The pack answered where men had hurt. His tone was not cruel, merely factual. She had altered balance, and now balance required tending. The bowl at her lips tasted like a promise that would be measured in days. They walked later into the grove beneath low branches that kept their own counsel. Wolves padded at their sides as they descended toward a ring of elder stones, and Izira felt the air thicken with age and expectation. At the circle stood those who shaped the pack's will, older wolves with patched pelts and humans whose faces were carved by seasons of service. Their gazes weighed her, not with spite but with practical curiosity, as if measuring whether her hands could be trusted to mend what had been torn. Kaelin presented her brief, precise. She had made a true act and owed repayment. The council would name it. Voices rose and fell, not loud but authoritative, like weather moving between hills. Izira felt each syllable land in her chest with the gravity of a decision. She could refuse and be cast out, or accept and be bound by new duties. Among them, she glimpsed not only demand but a possibility, an invitation to belong by labor rather than by birth. The wolves watched her as one watches a seed set in soil, not yet sprouted. The council's eyes lifted to Kaelin, then back to her, and the grove waited for Izira to breathe and answer. When the verdict came, it read like an old law written again. The elders declared her repayment to be service. 3 cycles lived within the pack's domain, tending injured young, unmaking snares, guiding wandering villagers away from denning places, and teaching those who would listen how to respect edges between human fields and wild ground. The terms were strict but practical, labor that stitched torn things and instruction that would prevent further harm. In return, the pack pledged protection and instruction. Kaelin would teach her the wolves' old names, how to read scent like a map, and how to bind wounds so that mouths would not know the medicine as strangers. She accepted, not because it promised comfort, but because it gave her work that mattered more than coin or reputation. The elders spoke of balance as a scale. Where iron had pressed pain into fur, hands must press balm and warning. The decision felt like a tool placed in her grasp, its edges sharp but useful. She understood the debt, now not as punishment, but as a task that could turn rage into repair, and that thought steadied something trembling inside her. The grove's hush folded around the resolution like a benediction. That night, Kaelin walked with her to the rim of the grove and began the first lessons beneath a sky that smelled of frost. He showed her how to read lines of scent the way a seamstress reads fabric. Changes in pattern meant movement. Old kills left their signature, and the faint iron smell of traps was like a shout in the quiet. He taught the practical: how to clamp a small wound, how to unthread a snare's knot without causing more tear, how to leave a mark that warned other humans away without inviting theft or malice. He instructed in small courtesies that were laws here: listen before acting, honor the carcass dignity, and carry knowledge by doing rather than boasting. Under his hands, she learned to steady a pup, to carry it close and feel its pulse slow beneath her palm. He spoke rarely of himself, but when he did, his words carried the weight of someone who had held a dozen roles: leader, hunter, guardian. Izira's last waking thought before sleep was not fear, but the thin, stubborn thread of hope that perhaps this debt would make her hands more needed than dismissed. She closed her eyes to the grove's slow breathing and, for the first time since the trap, let herself imagine a place where courage answered in repair. The days that followed blurred into rhythm: work, learning, and a silence that said more than conversation could. Izira rose with the first blue of dawn, when the frost still held the world hostage. Her breath misted as she followed Kaelin into the deep wood. Every lesson he gave carried 2 meanings: the practical one and the hidden law beneath. Tracks tell stories, he'd say, kneeling to press his palm into the soft earth. But only if you listen to the silence around them. She watched the way his fingers brushed the soil, gentle but certain, the way his eyes scanned the distance as if the forest whispered secrets meant for him alone. She learned quickly, stubbornly, burning with a desire to prove she belonged. The wolves began to treat her not as guest, but as necessary oddity. Some sniffed her hand. One nipped her boot, as if teasing a cub. At night, she cleaned wounds and changed poultices by the fire, the smell of pine resin and blood mingling. Yet sometimes, when she glanced up, she caught Kaelin watching her, not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity that unsettled her. He hid it well, behind his steady silence and king's bearing, but something in him shifted when she spoke to the wolves, when they trusted her more each day. It was as though a story he hadn't expected to rewrite was beginning without his permission. One evening, when the moon hung sharp and white as bone, Izira followed Kaelin up to the ridge overlooking the lake. The air was clear enough to show stars trembling in the water's skin. "You should rest," he said without turning. "You've done enough for one day." She smiled faintly. "You don't rest either." He didn't answer. His posture was still, but not peaceful. Tension coiled beneath the calm, like wind trapped under stone. She stepped closer, her cloak brushing against his arm. "Why did you really help me?" she asked softly. "You could have left me to die and taken the cub." His jaw flexed. For a heartbeat, silence stretched too long. Then he said, "Because you bled for what's mine." She frowned. "That's gratitude?" His gaze finally met hers, and something in it stole her breath. Ancient sorrow, fierce restraint. "No," he said. "That's recognition." The words held weight she didn't yet understand. He looked away again, toward the dark beyond the trees. You think wolves are ruled by instinct, but even instinct remembers kindness. He started down the ridge, his cloak moving like shadow. Izira stood alone for a moment, the night cold on her face, her heart drumming unevenly against her ribs. Recognition. The word clung to her like frost, and beneath it, a question she was suddenly afraid to ask. The following morning, the forest woke uneasy. Ravens croaked warnings from the upper boughs, and the wolves paced with low, restless growls. Izira sensed the change before Kalen said a word. When he entered the clearing, his expression was cut from stone. "Trappers," he said. The single word drained the warmth from the air. "They've moved closer. Too close." He unrolled a strip of hide marked with charcoal lines, a map of scent trails and patrol paths. "They've learned the patterns," he murmured. "They're not hunting at random." Izira studied the map, tracing the symbols. One mark, jagged and sharp, circled near the creek's bend. "That's where I found the first trap," she whispered. Kalen nodded. "Then it's where they'll start again." His hand brushed the map, fingers tightening. "They're not after pelts anymore. They're after power." The way he said it made her skin crawl. He looked up, eyes hard. "Stay in the den tonight. No matter what you hear." But when night came and the wind carried smoke, Izira could no more stay behind than the moon could refuse to rise. She found him by the creek, crouched low among the reeds. The air reeked of iron and men, sweat, oil, and the faint sweetness of whiskey. Torches moved between the trees like hunting eyes. Kalen's pack fanned out soundlessly for catching moonlight. Izira pressed her back to a trunk and watched as shadows collided with light. The trappers came prepared this time, nets strung with silver wire, blades etched with runes that burned faintly blue. Kalen gave a signal, a low whistle, quick as breath, and the wolves scattered like shards of night. The first clash was brutal. A torch flew, a wolf leaped. The air filled with snarls, screams, the metallic chorus of violence. Izira's heart pounded. She should have fled. But when she saw one of the wolves, a young one, limping from a wound, cornered by a man with a blade, instinct overrode sense. She grabbed a fallen branch, swung it with everything left in her, and knocked the weapon aside. The man turned, surprised, and in that moment, Kalen struck, swift, silent, final. When the man fell, Kalen's eyes snapped to her, furious and wild. "I told you to stay," he growled, voice shaking. She trembled, the branch still in her grip. "And watch you die," she shot back. The silence that followed was heavy enough to break. When dawn arrived, the snow was marred with ash and blood. The trappers were gone, but the air still buzzed with the ghost of battle. Kalen stood apart from the others, arms crossed, gaze on the horizon. Izira approached quietly. "I'm sorry," she began, but he shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for." He turned toward her, and she saw the exhaustion there, the kind that came from more than fighting. "You saved one of mine again," he said. "Twice now, you've changed what would have been written." His voice lowered. "That kind of act doesn't just balance a debt. It creates another." She blinked, unsure if he meant gratitude or something else. "Then tell me," she said softly. "What does it mean?" He hesitated, then spoke as if to the ground. "It means you've tied yourself to me, to us, in ways you can't untie easily." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and blood. "And it means the pack won't be the only ones hunting you now." His eyes met hers, dark, unguarded, and for the first time, afraid not for himself, but for her. The storm came 3 nights later, a howl torn straight from the throat of the mountain. Rain hammered Brackenmore until the earth turned slick and the trees whispered in uneasy tongues. Izira couldn't sleep. Every sound, every creak of the timbers, every gust through the cracks, made her heart trip faster. Outside, the wolves stirred restlessly, their silhouettes pacing in the downpour. Kalen stood by the doorway, the storm's glow painting him in flashes of silver. "They're coming," he said, voice barely louder than the rain. "Not the trappers?" Izira asked. He shook his head slowly. "Worse." The word felt like frost sliding down her spine. Lightning flared, and for an instant she saw fear, real, unmasked fear, in his eyes. "What are they?" she whispered. "Hunters," he said. "But not men. Not anymore." He moved quickly then, checking the shutters, murmuring words in a language older than the pines. Each syllable seemed to carry weight, grounding the air. "You'll stay near the fire," he said firmly. "Do not open the door, no matter what calls your name." His tone allowed no argument, but when he turned to go, she caught his wrist. "Kaelin," she breathed, "tell me the truth. Why are they hunting me too?" He hesitated, then met her gaze with the weariness of someone about to destroy what little peace remained. "Because the cub you saved carries royal blood, and when you touched him, the mark found you." Her hand trembled. "Mark," she echoed. Kaelin nodded, rain dripping from his hair. "It's old magic. Blood-bound. When you saved him, you bound yourself to the pack's line, my line." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air too thick. "So I'm cursed?" she asked, half laughing from disbelief. His gaze softened. "Cursed," he repeated quietly.
"No."
"Chosen. But those who hate my kind will hunt you for it." He reached toward her, as if to prove the truth, and his fingers brushed the inside of her wrist. The contact burned, not pain, but heat that rippled beneath the skin. A faint symbol glowed there, like a brand made of moonlight, a crown, small and sharp-edged, identical to the one embroidered on his cuff. She gasped and jerked her arm back. "What did you do to me?" she demanded. "You did it yourself," he said. "When you bled to save one of mine," the forest answered. Blood recognizes blood. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The rain pressed harder against the roof, the world outside a blur of gray and growling wind. Then a sound split the noise, distant, echoing wrong. Not wolf. Not man. A call that slid beneath the skin like cold water. Kaelin's expression changed. "They've crossed the border," he said, voice low. "They shouldn't be able to." The next moments unfolded like a fever dream. The doors shook. Shadows danced against the walls, tall, wrong, bending too far at the joints. Izira's heart thudded in her throat as Kaelin moved between her and the entrance, his back straight, shoulders broad, the calm of command anchoring the chaos. "Stay behind me," he said again, drawing a curved blade from his belt. It gleamed dull silver in the firelight. The first creature broke through the door, pale as bone, eyes black pits. Its scent hit like rot and ash. Kaelin lunged before it could move, blade singing through the air. The thing screamed, a sound like metal tearing. Izira covered her ears, but another shadow was already at the window. Wolves poured into the room, snarling, forming a wall of fur and teeth around them. Izira grabbed a fallen poker, her hands shaking. The creatures came in waves, fast, silent except for the hiss of breath. Kaelin fought like something born for it, every strike efficient, beautiful, terrible. But for every one he cut down, 2 more came. "There's too many," Izira cried. He turned toward her briefly, eyes glowing faint gold. "They're not here for me," he said. "They're here for you." Then something slammed into her from behind, not claws, but power, invisible and crushing. She fell to her knees, the poker clattering from her grip. Pain flooded through her arm where the mark burned brighter now, its glow pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She gasped, unable to move, the light spilling from beneath her skin like firefly sparks. The creatures froze, hissed, then drew back. Kaelin spun, saw her, and in that instant, his face changed. Fear, not for himself, but for her. He crossed the distance in a blink, catching her before she hit the floor. "Breathe," he ordered, voice rough with panic. "Izira, look at me." She tried. Gods, she tried. But her vision fractured, pieces of light and shadow spinning. "What's happening?" she choked out. He pressed his palm over the glowing mark, muttering words in that same ancient tongue. The pain dulled slightly, replaced by warmth that spread outward, steady and sure. "They can't touch you while it burns," he said softly. "The forest protects its own." Then he lifted his head, eyes blazing. But now they know who you are. When the storm finally broke, dawn crawled across the horizon like a wounded thing. The rain had washed the world raw, leaving mud and silence in its wake. The creatures were gone, their scent fading into the damp. Izira sat near the dying fire, wrapped in a cloak that felt too heavy with unspoken truth. Her wrist still shimmered faintly beneath the skin, the crown dim but alive. Kalen stood at the doorway, staring into the mist. His shoulders sagged with a weight she could almost feel. "They'll come again," he said. "They always do." She rose, shaky but determined. "Then teach me," she said quietly. He turned, brow furrowed. "Teach you?" She nodded. "If this mark ties me to you, to them, then I won't hide from it. I'll learn to use it." For a moment, he said nothing, just studied her face with an unreadable expression. Then, slowly, he nodded once. "Very well," he said. "If the forest marked you, it means it trusts you with its voice. Let's see if you can learn to speak it." The forest did not teach in whispers. It taught in wind and silence, in the sting of nettles and the press of roots beneath bare feet. Izira learned this quickly. Each dawn, Kalen led her deeper into Brackenmoor's heart, where sunlight dripped through the canopy like gold spilled carelessly on green glass. "The mark isn't power," he told her once as they climbed a slope slick with moss. "It's a bridge between what breathes and what remembers." She didn't understand at first. Her training began with stillness, sitting in the hush of dawn while the world rearranged itself around her. The mark on her wrist would pulse faintly, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat, then the heartbeat of the forest. Wind, roots, hidden streams. The connection terrified her and fascinated her in equal measure. Sometimes, when she lost focus, she'd hear the wolves' thoughts, not words, but impressions, hunger, belonging, the simple truth of being alive. "They don't think the way we do," Kalen said, watching her shiver. "They feel in shapes. You'll learn to listen to shapes." At night, he made her trace runes in ash by the fire, symbols that meant balance, memory, truth. Each one hummed faintly beneath her fingers. By the third night, she could sense the forest breathing with her. It was not quiet. It was alive and aware. As days bled into weeks, the line between human and wild blurred. Izira's hands grew callous from work. Her hair smelled perpetually of pine. The wolves no longer shied from her touch. A pup she called Finn would curl beside her at night, its steady breathing grounding her against nightmares. Yet beneath the peace, tension coiled, a thread neither of them pulled. Kalen had grown quieter, retreating behind his steady composure. She caught him sometimes at the lake's edge, eyes distant, face softened by something like regret. He spoke of the pack's laws, but never of his own heart. When she pressed, he'd only say, "There are things you're not ready to carry." But one evening, under a crimson dusk, she saw the truth slip through his mask. He was kneeling by a wounded wolf, whispering in the old tongue, when his sleeve slipped back, revealing scars etched across his forearm, jagged, deliberate marks shaped like the crown sigil. Not one, but many, each burned into skin. She froze, realization dawning. They weren't symbols of pride. They were bonds, one for every life he'd claimed responsibility for, every life he'd lost. When he saw her stare, he pulled the sleeve down. "Those aren't for stories," he said. "They're for remembering." His tone ended the conversation, but the image rooted itself in her heart. That night, the forest spoke louder. She dreamed of roots curling through bones, of wolves running beneath blood-red skies, of a voice that called her by name. Izira. It was neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel. "You walk with a borrowed crown." She woke gasping, sweat slick on her skin, the mark on her wrist burning faintly. Kalen was at her side instantly, his eyes glowing faint amber in the dark. "You heard it," he said, not asking but knowing. She nodded, trembling. "What is it?" "The forest's memory," he said softly. "It doesn't speak to many. Only those it chooses to bear witness." "Witness to what?" she asked. His silence answered for him. Something in his expression, fear, guilt, reverence, told her that what the forest remembered wasn't peace. It was war. There was a time, he said finally, when men and wolves were one people. Before greed taught us separation. The mark, it's the forest's way of reminding us what we lost. She wanted to ask what he had lost, but his face closed again like a door quietly locked. In the following days, her lessons deepened. Kaelin taught her to weave intention into movement, how to call the wind to mask a trail, how to still the air so the forest's breath could hide her. He told her every action was a promise. The ground gave only what it received. Magic isn't command, he said. It's conversation. The forest ignores those who shout. Izira practiced until her arms ached, until she could draw lines of energy from the soil through her fingertips. One afternoon, when she touched the mark, the world shifted, colors sharpened, sounds deepened. She could see trails of life like threads, deer paths glowing faintly gold, roots humming blue underfoot. You see, Kaelin said, standing beside her. You're part of it now. She turned toward him, breathless, the air between them charged. You said the mark ties me to you, she whispered. Then why does it feel like it's trying to understand me? He hesitated, searching her face. Because the forest remembers its queens as much as its kings. The words left her stunned. Queens. He nodded slowly. Long ago, there was one who bore the same mark. She ended the war that split our kind. She was lost until now. His gaze softened. You carry her echo. The revelation settled over her like new weather. Heavy, electric, undeniable. You think I'm her? She said, almost laughing at the absurdity. Kaelin didn't smile. I don't think, he said quietly. I know. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. When I found you bleeding on the ridge, I thought I was watching history repeat itself. The last queen of the pack bled for a cub too. And the man who saved her, his voice trailed off. Her heart stuttered. What happened to him? She asked softly. His jaw tightened. He died protecting her. The silence that followed stretched taut and trembling. Izira looked at him, understanding dawning like sunrise on frost. And you think that's our fate too? She asked. I think, he said, voice low, that the forest doesn't repeat stories. It rewrites them. His gaze locked with hers then, steady, fierce, tender all at once. The only question is how we'll end ours. Outside, a wolf howled, a long, mournful sound that carried both warning and promise. Inside, under the hum of firelight, Izira felt something shift deep in her chest. Not fear, not fate, but the dangerous beginning of love. Morning came cold and gold, the air sharp enough to taste. Izira woke before the wolves stirred, her wrist still faintly glowing beneath the skin. The mark no longer frightened her. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, an anchor between her and the forest. But with each day it burned brighter, whispering things she did not yet understand. Kaelin had grown quieter too. He trained her still, his voice steady and patient, yet something behind his eyes had changed, a weight he carried alone. When she asked what troubled him, he'd turn away with the same answer. It's nothing. But Izira knew better. The forest taught her to feel what was unspoken. The pack moved with unease, their howls shorter, sharper. Rumors drifted among them. Talk of human armies gathering at the valley's edge, men armed not with traps, but fire. One morning, Finn limped back from patrol, fur scorched. They burned the outer woods, Kaelin said, examining the pup's wounds. His voice was too calm, the kind of calm that followed rage. Izira touched the pup gently, feeling the mark flare against her palm. The air trembled, and Funn's breathing eased. When she looked up, Kaelin was staring at her, not with pride, but with sorrow. Every gift has a cost, he murmured. The cost revealed itself that night. The elders gathered in the great hall, the fire painting their faces in restless light. The scent of smoke and pine filled the air. Kaelin stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. "The humans are led by Rovan," he said, the name like a curse. Izira felt her chest tighten. "The trapper?" she whispered. Kaelin nodded. "He's gathered others, soldiers, mercenaries, even those who once hunted for sport. He claims he hunts monsters." His jaw flexed. "He means us." Murmurs rippled through the hall. "They know about the mark," one elder growled. "They'll come for her." Izira felt the room's weight shift toward her, dozens of eyes heavy with unspoken fear. "Then let them," she said before she could stop herself. "If they want me, they'll find I'm not easy prey." Her words drew silence. Then, slowly, Kaelin spoke. "You forget what they bring, Izira. Fire doesn't need to find you. It devours everything in its way." He looked at her, voice softer. "You are the key to both sides now. They think killing you will break us." She straightened, meeting his gaze. "Then we show them what happens when they're wrong." For the first time, something like pride flickered in his eyes, followed by fear. But not everyone in the pack shared his faith. Later, when the council disbanded, Izira overheard whispers from the shadows. "She's the forest choice," one voice said. "But what if it chose wrong?" Another answered, low and bitter. "Kaelin's heart clouds his judgment. The human girl brings war." The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. She turned to leave quietly, and froze. A hand caught her arm. It was Rhine, one of Kaelin's lieutenants, a wolf with eyes the color of ash and loyalty that wavered like mist. "They're afraid," he said. "Not of you, of what you make him." "And what's that?" she asked. "Human," he replied simply. Then he let her go. The forest felt heavier that night, its silence a mirror for the unease inside her. When Kaelin came to find her hours later, she stood by the lake, the moon tangled in her reflection. "They don't trust me," she said. He didn't deny it. "They'll learn. And if they don't—" He hesitated, then answered, "Then they'll follow me anyway." She turned to him, anger and fear warring in her chest. "Because you're their king?" He looked at her then, eyes glinting like steel. "Because I love them, even when they hate what I must protect." She wanted to believe that love extended to her. But when he looked away, she wasn't sure anymore. The betrayal came just before dawn. Izira woke to shouting, to the crackle of fire too close. The sky was red, not dawn but burning. She ran from her chamber and nearly collided with Rhine. "They've broken the outer ward," he gasped. "Humans? And worse." His face was pale, eyes wide. "They've brought hounds." The word made Izira's blood run cold. Not wolves, warped things, bred with magic and hate, their only loyalty to bloodshed. She could hear them already, snarling beyond the walls. Kaelin was in the courtyard, blade in hand, shouting orders. When he saw her, his face twisted between relief and fury. "Get to the crypts," he ordered. "Now." "No," she shouted back, defiant. "I won't hide while they burn this place." The mark on her wrist blazed suddenly, searing hot. The air crackled. Around her, the flames shifted, not dying, but bending, curling away from the walls. The wolves stopped fighting long enough to stare. Kaelin froze, watching the impossible happen. Fire obeyed her. "The forest protects its own," she whispered, remembering his words. Kaelin's eyes darkened. "No," he said softly. "You're not just protected." He stepped closer, awe and dread in his voice. "You're chosen to lead it." But even power could not stop treachery. As the flames bent to her will, movement flickered at the edge of her vision. Too fast, too sure. Pain burst across her shoulder. She stumbled. Rhine stood behind her, dagger dripping red. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling. "I can't let you destroy us." The wolves hesitated, torn between king and traitor. Kaelin roared, fury and grief intertwined, and in a blur, he was on Rhine. The fight was brutal, short, final. When it ended, Rhine lay still, his dagger buried in the earth beside him. Kaelin fell to his knees beside Izira, pressing his hand to her wound. "Stay with me," he whispered. She smiled faintly through the pain. You said the forest doesn't repeat stories, she murmured. Maybe it doesn't. His grip tightened. Don't you dare, he growled, voice cracking. Around them, the flames rose again, but this time not from her. They came from the trees themselves, alive and angry, burning red as blood. The forest had chosen its side. And as the humans broke through the gates, Izira realized something terrible and true. The war wasn't between man and wolf anymore. It was between what remembered and what forgot. The night cracked open with fire and screams. Smoke churned through Brackenmoor's heart, turning stars into ghosts. The pack fought in waves, fur and fang against iron and flame. Izira stumbled through the chaos, her arm bleeding, her vision swimming between moments of light and blackness. The mark on her wrist burned so fiercely it felt alive, as if something inside her had woken and refused to sleep again. Wolves lunged and fell. Men shouted prayers and curses alike. Kaelin's voice cut through it all, low and commanding, carrying across the inferno like a heartbeat. He fought with an elegance that belonged to old myths, every motion precise, every strike a sentence in a language meant to end wars. But even kings bleed. A blade caught his side. He staggered, then straightened, his eyes flaring amber. Izira saw him through the haze and ran, ignoring the pain that made her knees tremble. Kaelin, she screamed, but her voice was drowned by the roar of collapsing timber. The fire was no longer man-made. It was furious, wild, a living thing that fed on betrayal. The forest had decided to fight. Trees ignited and split, spilling sap like molten glass. The sky blazed red, and for a moment, the world looked like memory burning itself clean. She found Kaelin near the shattered gate, one hand pressed to his wound. Blood soaked through his tunic, dark and heavy. You shouldn't be here, he rasped, catching her wrist. I told you to hide, she snapped, shaking her head. You don't get to decide how I live. Her mark pulsed under his grip, hot as forge fire. Around them, wolves circled, waiting for command. They'll break through soon, Kaelin said. Even the forest can't hold forever. Izira stared past him at the trees, their branches writhing under the strain of flame. She could feel the forest's voice inside her skull, raw, desperate. Help us. It wasn't words but the ache of dying roots, the cry of burning earth. She pressed her palm to the ground. The mark flared, a white-hot pulse that seared through her veins. Power surged, wild and terrible. She saw through the flames, saw the trappers advancing, saw Rovan among them, his face twisted in triumph. He carried something in his hands, a chain of silver and bone, ancient and cruel. The sight made her chest tighten. He's got a binding charm, Kaelin said, following her gaze. It'll shackle any creature touched by the mark. If he reaches you, the forest dies with you. Izira rose slowly, steadying herself. Then I'll reach him first. The battle turned into a storm of movement and sound. Izira ran through the wreckage, the mark blazing a path through smoke. Wolves fell in beside her, silent as shadows, their fur glowing faintly from the light spilling off her skin. Rovan's soldiers turned their torches toward her, shouting, "The witch! Take her!" Bolts hissed through the air. She ducked, rolled, came up swinging with a spear she'd snatched from the ground. The mark guided her strikes, every motion sure and deadly. The wolves tore through the lines behind her, unstoppable. Then she saw Rovan, standing on the blackened ridge, chain in one hand, torch in the other. His laughter cut through the fire's roar. "You think you're their queen?" he shouted. "You're just another animal pretending to matter." He swung the chain, and lightning rippled from it, slamming into the ground at her feet. Pain exploded through her limbs. The mark screamed. She fell to her knees. Rovan advanced, eyes gleaming. "All this," he sneered, "for beasts." He raised the chain again, but before he could strike, Kaelin appeared, silent as thunder, his blade flashing once, twice. Rovan staggered, shock freezing his face. "You," he gasped, and then the fire took him. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The rain began to fall, sudden and heavy, hissing against the flames. Izira blinked, dazed, as the smoke thinned. Kalen dropped beside her, his breathing ragged. "It's done," she whispered. He didn't answer. When she turned to look at him, her stomach dropped. The wound in his side had deepened, blood soaked the ground beneath him. "No," she said, pressing her hands against the wound. "You can't." "It's all right," he said, his voice softer than the rain. "The forest will heal." "I can't heal you," she insisted, reaching for the mark. But he caught her hand, his grip gentle.
"No.
"If you give it all, there'll be nothing left of you." She shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. "Then let it take me." He smiled faintly, even as his breath faltered. "It already has." Around them, wolves gathered, silent witnesses. The rain fell harder, extinguishing the last of the flames. Izira felt the mark pulse once more, then spread. Light poured from her skin, wrapping around him like a shroud. The forest sighed, and for a moment everything stopped. When the light faded, the world was new. The fire was gone, the trees still smoking but alive. The wolves stood unharmed, their eyes reflecting dawn. Izira knelt in the mud, the mark on her wrist dim now, no longer burning, just a faint shimmer under the skin. Kalen lay beside her, motionless. She pressed her forehead to his chest, praying for a heartbeat. Then she felt it, soft, slow, steady. His eyes fluttered open, their color different now, deeper, older. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. She smiled through her tears. "I told you," she said, voice trembling. "You don't get to decide how I live." He laughed weakly, the sound breaking into a cough. Around them, the forest breathed again. New green pushed through the ash. The wolves bowed their heads. The fire had not destroyed Brackenmore, it had remade it. Izira looked toward the rising sun and felt the forest inside her pulse once. Calm, content. "It's over," she whispered. Kalen's hand found hers, his fingers curling loosely around her palm. "No," he said softly, looking toward the trees. "It's beginning." Morning came soft and strange, painted in the pale gold of peace after ruin. Brackenmore steamed gently in the new sun, its wounds still smoking but already healing. The wolves moved like ghosts among the ashes, heads lowered, their paws leaving prints that filled with water and light instead of blood. Izira stood where the great gate had once been, her cloak torn and heavy with soot. The mark on her wrist no longer burned. It glowed faintly, like a coal that refused to go out. The world felt different, larger, quieter, waiting. She breathed deeply, tasting rain and ash, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. The forest hummed softly beneath her feet, a steady pulse that matched her own. Behind her, Kalen stirred, his wounds bound in strips of moss and linen. He was alive, weak but alive. When he tried to rise, she was there instantly, steadying him. His smile was tired, but it reached his eyes. "You should be resting," she said gently. "So should you," he countered, his voice rough. "But kings don't rest when crowns are still looking for heads." She glanced at him, brow furrowing. "Crowns?" His gaze dropped to her wrist, where the light pulsed faintly. "The forest has chosen its ruler," he murmured. "And it isn't me anymore." Her breath caught. "No," she said immediately. "That's not." "It is," he interrupted, calm and certain. "The mark answers to life, not blood. It bound itself to you because you gave what no wolf or man would. You bled for something that wasn't yours." He reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek, rough and warm. "You made it yours." The words should have comforted her, but they didn't. They hurt because she heard what he wasn't saying, that his time as alpha was over. "Then what happens now?" she asked softly. "You lead," he said simply. "And I serve." "No," she whispered, her throat tightening. "I didn't ask for this." His smile was small, proud, sad. "Neither did the forest. But it still breathes because of you." Around them, The pack began to gather, moving quietly, eyes bright in the morning light. They formed a wide circle, not bowing, not speaking, waiting. A wind stirred through the burned trees, cool and clean, carrying the scent of green things reborn. Izira looked at their faces, then at Kaelin, and for the first time, she understood. The crown wasn't a weight. It was a promise. She stepped forward, feeling the earth shift beneath her feet, as if recognizing her. The wolves bowed their heads in unison, and the sound of their breathing became one long exhale, a single heartbeat echoing through the grove. Izira lifted her marked hand, and the light flowed from it like liquid sunrise, spilling across the ground, seeping into roots and ashes alike. Grass unfurled where flame had eaten, flowers pressed up through soot, and the air filled with the scent of rain and renewal. The pack watched in silence as the light dimmed and the mark faded to a soft shimmer beneath her skin. She turned slowly to Kaelin. "It's not just me," she said. "It's us. The forest doesn't belong to one. It belongs to everyone who guards it." His eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like years, he laughed, a real sound, warm and alive. "Then rule it that way," he said. "Not as a queen above us, but as a heart among us." She smiled, and something knotted deep inside her chest. Around them, the wolves began to howl, not mourning, but celebration, voices twining into the wind like threads of silver. The sound rose and fell, wild and perfect. Later, when the forest had quieted again, Izira and Kaelin walked along the lake where it had all begun. The water reflected the sun like polished gold. Birds returned to the branches, tentative but brave. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" she asked, watching ripples dance across the surface. "The humans?" Kaelin shook his head slowly. "Not soon. Fire teaches even the proud to fear." He paused, glancing at her. "But fear isn't what we need them to learn." "What then?" she asked. "Respect," he said. "The kind that grows roots instead of walls." She nodded, thinking of the villagers she'd once called her own, the mayor, his son, even Rovan before greed had hollowed him out. "Maybe someday," she said softly, "when they remember that the world doesn't belong to them alone." Kaelin smiled faintly. "When that day comes, you'll remind them." She laughed quietly. "You sound certain." "I am," he said. "You have the kind of stubbornness that builds peace." Their hands brushed, and for a moment, the world held still. Two lives balanced between duty and desire, light and shadow. Then the forest sighed, and life moved again. That night, as stars gathered above Brackenmoor, Izira stood at the edge of the grove. The air was cool, smelling of wet bark and promise. Behind her, the pack slept in quiet circles. Beside her, Kaelin leaned against a fallen log, half asleep but smiling faintly. She looked down at her wrist, tracing the faint shimmer beneath her skin. It no longer burned, it breathed. The forest's pulse matched her own. "What are you thinking?" Kaelin asked without opening his eyes. She smiled. "That peace is harder work than war." "It is," he said, "but it's the kind worth bleeding for." She turned to him, studying his face in the starlight. "And if it calls us to bleed again?" He opened his eyes then, gaze meeting hers with quiet certainty. "Then we'll bleed together." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. The night pressed close, not heavy but kind, wrapping them in the scent of pine and earth and the promise of tomorrow. In the distance, a wolf howled. Long and low, the sound of memory turned to hope. And as the first wind of dawn stirred the leaves, Izira understood what the forest had meant all along. The crown was never meant to be worn. It was meant to be shared. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Let me know in the comments below. What part hit you the hardest? Was it Izira's courage, Kaelin's sacrifice, or the way the forest finally came alive again? Speech balloon. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who still believes love can rise from ashes. Crescent Moon Fire. Until next time, protect the wild, cherish the gentle, and remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can awaken the oldest kind of magic. Wolf faced Dizzy.